This video is going to be somewhat different. I'd like to respond at length to the New York Times endorsement of Amy Klobuchar and Elizabeth Warren. If I have anything of importance to add, it is following the approach of my comments on the 6th Democratic national debate. That is, I can use what I've learned here in Iowa to comment on the national story. The New York Times posits the difference as between two visions for the Democratic Party. Quote, some in the party view President Trump as an aberration and believe that a return to a more sensible America is possible. Then there are those who believe that President Trump was the product of political and economic systems so rotten that they must be replaced. In their fourth paragraph, they say the Democratic primary contest is often portrayed as a tussle between moderates and progressives. To some extent, that's true. But when we spent significant time with leading candidates, the similarity of their platforms on fundamental issues became striking. And to elaborate on that more, all of the candidates think that things are bad, that the system is rotten, and that major structural changes need to be made. The Times goes on to observe that any Democrat who is elected from the present field would be the most progressive in decades. The editorial board, after patting itself on the back for spending more than a dozen hours talking to candidates, rightly observes that that experience is impossible for most Americans. Frankly, the kind of political campaigning that's gone on in Iowa is impossible for most Americans. It's a reason why I, as a resident of Washington State, traveled to Iowa to see firsthand what's going on. It's true that I came here to volunteer for Senator Bennett, but when it became apparent quickly that that wasn't going anywhere, I've spent the rest of my time traveling to political events, filming the candidates, and posting YouTube videos of what they had to say. It's different to watch a candidate give a stump speech in a local setting with a small crowd, and also to watch that same candidate answer questions on the fly. This is not something the New York Times was able to do. And sitting down with a candidate in the possibly intimidating circumstance or setting of a boardroom is not the same as listening to the candidate appealing to everyday voters in metropolitan or rural Iowa. I'm in agreement with their criticisms of Senator Bernie Sanders. They do not endorse him on the progressive side because he's too old, meaning he'll be 79 in January of 2021 when he would be sworn in. His health is iffy because he did have a heart attack, and because he's proud of not compromising. He's not a consensus builder. He's not a unifier. In fact, he hasn't been in the Democratic Party in his decades in Congress. He's been a socialist Democrat. You cannot look to a man with that background, or a woman for that matter, and expect them to unify the country and or get much done. I should explain at the outset that I am an Elizabeth Warren fan. Until I came to Iowa, I described myself as an Elizabeth Warren Democrat. I didn't like the way she was treated by Obama. She did all of the legwork necessary to have the Federal Consumer Protection Agency passed, and then he refused to appoint her as the first head of that agency. Her response was to go back to Massachusetts, run for Senate against an incumbent Republican senator in Massachusetts, and beat him. That showed courage, grit, and fortitude. In 2012, I wanted to write in Elizabeth Warren for president instead of Barack Obama because I was that angry that he had extended the Bush tax cuts. I researched the law in Washington, and for my vote for Elizabeth Warren to have been counted, she would have had to register with the Secretary of State in Washington. She did not do that, so I ended up voting for Obama instead of Elizabeth Warren. Given my previous admiration and support for her, it has been a real disappointment to watch her campaign here in Iowa. I don't know why she went the Medicare for All route. All of the Republicans are against it. Half of the Democrats are against it. That's 75% of the votes in the Senate being against a plan that she's pushing. And as far as I'm concerned, it torpedoed her campaign. If you read the New York Times editorial and focus only on their comments about Elizabeth Warren, if that's an endorsement, it's a very lukewarm or tepid endorsement. To my reading, they have as many reservations and concerns about Senator Warren as they do positive comments about her. They call her a gifted storyteller. I did enjoy her stump speech. That was an interesting story. But every time I've seen her do a question and answer period, I've been badly disappointed. The first several times I refused even to put up a video of the question and answer session because it wasn't worth anything. Her recent appearance in Mason City cut her stump speech from 37 minutes to just under 12 and had lots more time for questions and answers. But I commented in the video that instead of answering the question, often she would just take blocks of prose from her deleted stump speech and insert them into the answer, even if they weren't particularly related to the question that was asked. They also are buying Warren's anti-corruption campaign. When you listen to her speak, she declares many things to be corrupt. They're not corrupt. They're wrong. They're misguided. They're unjust. But they're not corrupt. And by corrupt, I mean criminal. They're not criminal. A bad example, but one that comes to mind, is a large donor giving lots of money to a president of either party and being rewarded with an ambassadorship to a not significant country. Is that corrupt? Well, it certainly smells. Is it illegal? Not by a million miles. Has it been going on forever? Yes, it has. Some of the deals that are made, the prescription drug industry bought off Congress decades ago. Was that corrupt? No, I used the phrase bought off. I should have used the phrase lobbied. They twisted arms and got that ban on the US government negotiating drug prices for Medicare through Congress. Was that graft? Was that bribery? No, it wasn't. Was it wrong? Yes, it was wrong. Was it corrupt? No, not really. So when the New York Times says they hope that Elizabeth Warren does enact an anti-corruption policy, I don't really know what they're talking about. If they want to change how business is done in Washington, D.C., fine. Everybody's in favor of that. But you're not going to be putting lobbyists and legislators in jail. On foreign policy, in her stump speech, Elizabeth Warren really doesn't discuss foreign policy. They say that she speaks fluently about foreign policy. That's an interesting word. Elizabeth Warren speaks well. You would expect a Harvard law professor to be articulate. But she speaks fluently, not knowingly, not knowledgeably, not intimately about foreign policy. Joseph Biden, on the other hand, does speak knowingly and knowledgeably and intimately about foreign policy. When Joe Biden says in his campaign speeches that he is on a first-name basis with almost all of the leaders of countries around the world, that's true. He is. They compliment Senator Warren for having a serious approach to policymaking. That translates to, I have a plan for that. Frankly, I think all of America got tired of, I have a plan for that. And the fact that you have a plan for that, even one that you've studied and given a lot of thought to, does not mean you have a snowball's chance in hell of getting it enacted. Her plan to fund her present Medicare or health care plan is a puzzle. I believe she has more or less refused to explain it because it's too complicated. They also discuss the issue of what a president can do without Congress. All of the candidates address that. They do it in the form of, this is what I will do in my first 100 days in office. By executive order, I will do X, Y, and Z. What they all intend to do is actually quite similar. There are limits on what a president can do without congressional authority, and I don't think Elizabeth Warren has any head start over anyone else in that regard. I hope this was helpful. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you like this political content, please consider subscribing. Thank you for watching.